Wow, you look great out there. You know, people always say, people who visit say, Billy, we love coming to Asbury. You have a great service every Sunday, but it's fun just to come and look at your congregation. You know, they're so interesting looking. You're really interesting looking today. You look great. Can you adjust me a little bit, down just a little bit? I'm going to testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me okay? Is that good? Okay. You may have heard about the lion who got out of the Atlanta Zoo. It roamed into one of the suburbs of Atlanta and saw two boys playing catch with a football. Just as it appeared that it might attack one of the boys, the other boy tore off a board from a fence and started swinging it at the lion until it finally ran away. A reporter from the Atlanta Constitution just happened to be in the area and saw the whole thing and ran up to the boy and said, "Son, that was mighty brave of you. I want to do a story on you." And he took out his pad and his pencil and said, "Let's see, I'll title it, Young Bulldog Fan Saves Friend from Vicious Animal." The boy said, "Well, excuse me, sir, but I'm really not a Bulldog fan." "Oh," said the reporter, "since you were in Georgia and playing football, I just figured you loved UGA. I can fix that." And he scratched out that title and wrote another one. "How's this? Brave Yellow Jacket Fan Rescues Friend from Terrible Attack." "Well," said the boy, "I'm not a Yellow Jacket fan either." "You're kidding. I thought everyone from Georgia was either a Bulldog or a Yellow Jacket fan." "Well, maybe so," said the boy, "but I'm not from Georgia. I'm from Alabama, and I happen to be a big Crimson Tide fan." Whereupon the reporter turned to a new sheet of paper and wrote the title, "Little Redneck Hoodlum Abuses Kind Kitty Cat." Well, that's a funny story that says so much about human nature. How we perceive and judge things from our own personal experiences, our own personal preferences, and our own personal prejudices. In fact, if you're not from Georgia or Alabama, if you've never experienced this heated rivalry, then that joke probably wasn't very funny to you. But every one of us tends to perceive and to judge things from our own experiences. So much of what Jesus was about was trying to get people to be aware of this part of our nature. He was constantly trying to get people to expand their consciousness, to expand their knowledge, to expand their empathy, to see things from a different perspective. Now, just as the incident with the lion and the little boys could have been reported in different ways, could have had 3 different stories depending on what title the reporter used, the resurrection story of Jesus is told 4 different ways in the Bible. No 2 accounts of the resurrection in the 4 Gospels are exactly alike. And there's a good reason for this. The purpose of the 4 Gospels was not to produce a history or a biography or a memoir of Jesus and his life. It's true that some of the sources that were used by the authors were probably historical, but the purpose of those who wrote the Gospels was theological. That is, their purpose was to present issues about the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. Each writer of the 4 Gospels wanted to communicate different thoughts and truths about Jesus about his teachings, and about God. Now, all of the resurrection stories have one thing in common. Women are the first ones to go to the tomb. Women are the first witnesses of the resurrection. And we're pretty sure this is accurate, because at that time and in that culture, the testimony of female eyewitnesses had little official credibility. Why would the writers of the Gospels base the most important event in Christianity on the word of those who had little credibility if it wasn't true? There's another good reason why women were the first witnesses. The men were hiding. All of the male followers of Jesus were in great danger, grave danger, as Lieutenant Caffey would say from A Few Good Men. The story that Elizabeth read for us today is from the Gospel of Luke. It tells us that a group of women who were friends of Jesus brought spices to the tomb in order to anoint the body. When they got there, they discover that the stone has been rolled away from its entrance, from the tomb's entrance. And they discover that Jesus' body is missing. And then they are given a divine message that he has risen. Now, as you might imagine, they go right back to the disciples to tell them what had happened, but you can see it coming, can't you? Those crazy women. Someone was pulling a big one on them. The Roman soldiers were mocking them. It's bad enough that they tortured and killed our rabbi. Now they have to rub salt in the wound by teasing and mocking us, playing games with our women. And if it wasn't the soldiers, it's the stress. Losing Jesus is too much for them. It's pushed them over the edge. They're delusional. You get a bunch of women together and they'll believe anything. But all of a sudden, one man, one of the disciples, just one of them, Luke says, gets up and runs to the tomb. It was Peter. And when Peter gets to the tomb, and you know he had to be out of breath, have you ever run so hard and so fast that when you stop, you're dizzy, you can't even see well? He probably had to gather himself and catch his breath to make sure that he was really seeing what he was seeing. The body was gone. The women were right. And all Peter could see were the strips of linen lying by themselves. And the text says he went away wondering what had happened. What made Peter get up and run to the tomb? His checking it out wasn't like us running down the block to see why the police are at our neighbor's house. It wasn't like driving to the drugstore for some medicine. Going out of that locked room, leaving that hiding place, could mean being the next person tortured, could mean being the next person crucified. It happened all the time. The Romans, they were known for it. They'd crucify people right along the wall in Jerusalem. The soldiers even liked to amuse themselves by crucifying people in different positions, writes the historian Josephus. And of course, everyone was still talking about the time the Romans crucified 6,000 people, 6,000 slaves along the Appian Way. What made Peter run to the tomb? It wasn't curiosity. You don't put your life on the line just because you're curious. What motivates a person to do something like that? The only thing I can think of is hope. Hope. It's a powerful thing, you know. I heard about a school teacher who retired and started volunteering at a large city hospital. A classroom teacher had a student in that hospital, and so she called this former teacher to ask her to visit the young man and try to help him with his homework. We're currently studying nouns and adverbs, she said. I hope you can help him so he won't be too far behind the other students when he gets back. And the former teacher agreed to do so she took down the boy's name and room number. When she got to the hospital, she was shocked to discover that the boy was in the burn unit. Have you ever been in a burn unit? Not a pleasant place. I have a close friend that is a nurse in a burn unit in California. I don't know how he does it. He's in great ministry there. The teacher was embarrassed when she walked into the room and saw that the child was in very serious condition, was in great pain and misery, and she didn't know what to do, but she decided to press on with the lesson, and she stumbled through it, ashamed of putting the boy through such a senseless exercise at such a time. The next day, the nurse on the burn unit said to her, "What did you do to that boy yesterday?" And the teacher was just about to apologize when the nurse said, "We had given up on him. But ever since you visited him, he seems to be fighting back, responding to treatment." The boy himself would later explain that he had given up hope. But it all changed when he had come to the simple realization that they wouldn't send a teacher to work on nouns and adverbs with a dying boy, would they? Hope. It's powerful, tenacious, life-changing. In Paul's letter to the Romans, he writes an incredible sentence: "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may flourish in hope." May the God of hope. An unusual phrase, isn't it? I mean, we often hear about the God of love. God is love. God of hope. Not because God protects us from death, but because God brings us back to life again. Because life, not death, is God's will for us. You know, none of us should feel too badly about finding the resurrection hard to believe. Let that go. Don't feel guilty about that. Resurrection is not something we can test like gravity or true north. Nicholas of Cusa was a 15th century German theologian, philosopher, and astronomer who wrote a book called On Learned Ignorance. He said that there are at least 3 kinds of ignorance that show up in those who seek God. He says, first, there are those who do not know that they do not know. Then there are those who know that they do not know, but who think they ought to know. Finally, there are those who know they do not know, and who receive this learned ignorance as God's own gift, because it relieves them from the terrible burden of thinking they have to know everything God knows, and it frees them to live in a state of perpetual wonder. Nicholas says, this is very high-level ignorance. We do not know what resurrection will mean for us in the end. We cannot know how it will feel or how it works or what it will look like. But we do have evidence that it is so. God has woven resurrection into our daily lives so that we can learn the shape of it and perhaps to learn to trust the strength of it when our own time comes. I'm thinking of the butterfly plant in front of my house that I kill every year. I prune it, end up cutting way too much of it, so much so that I kick myself knowing I have destroyed it. And yet time and time again, year after year, it comes back greener and fuller, bushier than ever. I'm thinking of a teacher who was fired from his job just 6 months short of his retirement after 25 years of teaching. It was a nasty piece of work on the part of his superiors. They wanted to punish him for challenging them and wanted to make an example for anyone else thinking about trying the same thing. They called it early retirement and gave him a party that he suffered through. I've been to my own funeral, he said, recounting the pain of it. I lost my students, my program, my livelihood, my pride. But you know what he said? There really is life after death. I'm doing things I always wanted to do but never had time for. I'm spending time with my wife. I'm finding energy I thought I had lost forever. Getting crucified turned out better than I thought. I'm thinking of Janice Gant, a woman who worked hard at loving people at this church, who helped nurture them and care for them, who helped build up this community of faith. She wore 100 hats. And when she lost her fight with cancer in 2005, many of us were concerned. We were not as strong a church then as we are now. And we wondered who would fill Janice's shoes and wear those many hats. What we had not considered were all of the seeds that Janice had planted with her love and care. Seeds that blossomed into people who would give and serve and even bring more life into this faith community. I'm thinking of Bob Osborne. Many of you know it. Many of you don't know it. Bob, who is one of our main ushers, the tall, distinguished-looking man with white hair who greets people with passion and warmth every Sunday, was greeting people here last Sunday, is not here today because he will soon be making his transition. Bob was told a couple of months ago that his cancer had progressed and that he would soon be taking his last breath on earth. Yet, we have seen Bob come to church Sunday after Sunday and keep greeting and hugging and welcoming people as he always had before, with joy and love and compassion. And we've seen the joy of the Lord in Bob even in his dying. We've experienced the love and presence of God with the way Bob has faced his mortality with grace and dignity and faith. We have experienced so much life amidst death. That gives me hope. There's one more person I'm thinking about today, and that is Peter. The Apostle Peter, the one who ran to the tomb. He reminds me there is hope and new life because Peter, the one who was brave enough to run out of the room into the tomb, the one who would have been crucified, is the same man who only days before denied even knowing Jesus. The same person who cried out, "I never met the man." That's the same person who ran out of the locked room. Or was it? New life. It's all around us, isn't it? Life out of death. That gives me hope. Hope for me. Hope for you. Hope for eternity.